Hey folks, my name is Jen. Here is the Sakamoto, and today we are going to do another installment, I guess, of the Poetry Prattle. Basically, where I talk about a poem that I really love, like one that I count among my absolute favorites. Both cats in here, so we'll see how this goes before they make me, like, let them out, or in, or out, or in, or standing in the doorway deciding if they're gonna go out or in. You know, fucking cat stuff. Anyway, today the poem that we are going to be talking about is called Invictus, and it is by William Ernest Henley, and I think it's pretty famous. Like, it should be a very well known poem. Also, if it wasn't introduced to you guys during school at all, you'd probably know it as Nelson Mandela's favorite poem that he apparently recited while he was incarcerated. And also, I think it's like that movie that has to do with like his life and stuff like that. I think it plays a role in that as well. Like, the movie itself is called Invictus. I've never watched it. Yeah. Anyway. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I think whatever gods may be from my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. So, like I said, I think this is a very well-known poem, and we were shown this in high school, in the 9th grade. I don't think it was a daily thing. I believe it was a weekly thing, because we didn't have this class every day, but it was our humanities class in the 9th grade. Humanities basically was a combined class of English and social studies. Our English teacher would introduce to us weekly a poem of some importance and then kind of go over it with us. And after a little bit, he started having us bring poems that we loved or had meaning to us, and we could present them to class if we so chose. But I believe that I think Invictus was one of the ones that our teachers brought to us themselves. I have always kind of liked this poem. I remember the first time that we heard it in class, I thought it was really fucking badass. I was like, damn, man, if I ever get a tattoo, I want those last 2 lines of the final stanza tattooed on me. That has not happened, but those are lines that are the most memorable to me. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Those are the lines that I think are the most memorable, and those are the lines that I know have come to mind before, or things that I've directly quoted. As far as delving more deeply into the poem, so I kind of did a stanza by stanza analysis. This was more recent. Actually, Invictus, the word itself, that is Latin for unconquerable or undefeated. I don't know if the word Invictus itself has any other meaning. A lot of the times back in the day, people would put Latin on things because people knew Latin more. It was something that was more readily taught, and I believe, at least in the Catholic Church, I don't know about anything else, but at least within the Catholic Church, I know that up until like a certain time period, I believe it was like the 40s or 50s, I could be wrong, but it was sometime around then, masses also used to be said in Latin, and so people who went to church probably would at least know some Latin. Anyone who had like a higher education would probably know Latin. It was just something that it's a dead language, but it was, people were more interested in it. Personally, I'm fascinated by Latin, and always have been. So this ramble is to mean that I'm not sure if Invictus was chosen just because Latin was more known and practiced and used at the time, or if there is any extra meanings to it, like is Invictus a word that would be on something? I don't know if any more, but back in the day I believe some like commemorative medals and things like that would have like Latin phrases on them engraved, so I'm not sure if Invictus would be something that would be within that, or yeah, that's what I mean. I'm not sure if there's anything like that going on, or if he just chose it because it was the most fitting for this particular poem as well. Then kind of going through the stanzas, he talks about out of the night that covers me, black's the pit from pole to pole. So I wasn't really sure if the pit was referring to like hell. There seems to be some kind of religious connotations within the poem. The night that covers me, I kind of took more to be like a dark cloud, depression, things like that. I didn't take it as like literally the nighttime, although it could also be that, but I mean like shadows, depression, this dark cloud that you're under, I think is more along the lines of what was meant. He goes on to say, I think whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul, so unconquerable Invictus. And I found that really interesting when I was looking at this again. It says, I think whatever gods may be. So that's kind of like a gods plural, which is interesting, I guess, going along with the Latin, because that's like Roman, and that would be multiple gods. I possibly could be reading too much into that though, but that kind of phrasing just felt like it's more unsure of who exactly to thank, kind of like wavering on religion, like not really, whatever gods may be. So not really sure about that, not sticking with one particular belief. I found to be interesting for a poem of this time period, because this was like, let's see, let me just double check when this was written. 1875 was when that was written, so yeah, especially for that time period, I guess would be kind of interesting. In the fell clutch of circumstance, so this next stanza is very interesting because it talks about, my head is bloody but unbowed through everything that they are going through. They're beaten, but they are again Invictus. They are undefeated. And then also just the certain word choices in the fell clutch of circumstance. I have not winced nor cried aloud under the bludgeonings of chance. My head is bloody but unbowed. So just using the words of circumstance and chance. So circumstance is, and I double checked that I knew the exact meaning, but it's a condition connected with relevant events. And then with chance is something occurring without obvious design or cause. So it was just interesting with those two, because it seems whether it's unexplained or not, because there's reasons for the circumstance, or everything's by chance. Whatever the reasons are, whether it's unexplained or not, he continues onward no matter what, whether it was just a random happenstance. You know how people say, well, everything happens for a reason. Well, sometimes there isn't a reason. And he's just saying, well, no matter what, even if there's a reason or not, continuing and marching forward, continuing onward. The next stanza is kind of talking about beyond a place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. So I initially, when I looked at this, I was wondering if this is like supposed to be any references to like hell in particular, or if it just had to do with like death in general, like at death's door, because I knew just a little bit about the poet's life at that time. But when I looked into a little bit more about when the poem was written, it does seem like this was one of a series of poems that he wrote while he was hospitalized. He had battles with like tuberculosis in his younger days, and this seems to be one of those poems he was writing at the time. And I don't know if you guys know a lot about tuberculosis or how it was known at the time as consumption. Honestly, it is something that freaks me the hell out, just because that it's in the background of a lot of creepy shit that I've heard over the course of the years, whether it has to do with tuberculosis hospitals and things that occurred there, or having to do with unfortunate vampire scares, because people didn't understand what the hell consumption was, and they thought it was vampires. So, yeah. But that places like this would be full of a lot of, I imagine, wrath and tears. A lot of anger, you know, at their situation, and upset. Sometimes at these hospitals, it would be like parents would be there, and sometimes their kids would also end up being there because there was nobody else to take care of them. So it was like things were complicated. And there's just the horror of the shade. So like death, you know, you're there at death's door. There's lots of treatments and things that were going on, but a lot of it was like experimental and new, and it wasn't guaranteed to work. And sometimes even if it worked on some people, it wouldn't work for everyone, and things were incredibly dangerous. Then you also have like the hospital staff themselves getting ill, so it was it could be a pretty depressing place. I don't know for certain if he was at a tuberculosis specific hospital, or what, but I do know that from the bits and pieces that I do know about some of these places, this would be like really upsetting, terrifying, and just really depressing. When he's like talking about this, he's saying he's stuck in this place, but you know what? Beyond that, and even though I'm here, the terrible past that I have gone through, I am still unafraid. Unafraid currently, unafraid about what's ahead, kind of a feeling. That's what it seems like he's expressing. And then it says, it matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. So these two lines, I actually kind of looked into them a little bit, because I felt like I've heard the idea of a scroll or scroll of punishments or things like that, and I figured I knew what the meaning was, but I just wanted to double check it. I didn't know what the heck straight the gate meant, I have never heard that, like, ever. So I also ended up looking into that a little bit because I was like, okay, this has to be a reference to something. Oftentimes, just like today, poets would take past writings of other more famous poems or historical things, quotes from verses from the Bible and stuff like that. They would take things and put them into their works and use as a reference because, well, they knew what it meant, and because people were more likely to have, like, these writings would be more well known. People would, like, pick up what they were putting down a lot more readily, I guess. I did look into this, and straight the gate. This is possibly a play on a Bible verse, apparently, which says something about a straight and narrow gate. And basically it's referring to a difficult and narrow path to glory. They're probably meaning glory like heaven, but it doesn't necessarily mean that in this poem. And then how charged with punishments the scroll. That has to do with kind of with like fate, but also potentially it goes along with like the above kind of like Bible verse reference. The scroll would be the book of accounts or whatever that St. Peter supposedly has at the gates, with a record of all your like deeds, good and bad, and like what punishments you'd have in the afterlife kind of deal, I guess, is what that's more in reference to. The last two lines, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. He is basically saying, he's making his own choices, no matter what the repercussions they may have. He is in charge of his own fate. So I kind of read this poem slightly in like two different ways. One of which is saying like, no matter what this speaker, is how we called it in class when we would talk about the poem. It's not necessarily the poet, it's the speaker, because sometimes the poet isn't the speaker, or yeah. I just realized that recently, because it's been, like I said, literally so long since I've been in school and, like, doing all of this, but, yeah. The speaker would be saying he is in charge of his own soul, his own actions, his own fate. Nothing is really predestined. Everything is in his hands completely, good or bad. And the second way that I read it was maybe it's like pushing aside any religious implications. He will do whatever, as he is the one whose choices matter, and it doesn't matter what rules are in place at the end. Basically, either way, no matter what he is not giving up. He is completely unconquered by fate or life or anyone, really. I learned a little bit about William Ernest Henley. So I figured, dang, you know what would be a good idea? I would probably be looking up a little about the poet if I'm gonna be talking about their poem, and then maybe also I can get an idea of like their headspace at the time when they were like writing this. So like I said, he was apparently in the hospital when he wrote this particular poem, fighting tuberculosis, and his life was also really difficult. And I don't know like a ton about him. The little bits and pieces that I found about him, I found on like Wikipedia, basically. But his life was also incredibly difficult. When he was younger, he dealt with a lot of illness. He battled tuberculosis. He also was an amputee. He had to have one of his legs amputated, and they wanted to amputate his other leg, but he was like, no, and he got like a second opinion, and I guess they were able to save his other leg. But it wasn't just that either. He had one child, a daughter. Unfortunately, she died from, I forget what it was, but it was an illness she ended up dying from when she was 5, which is very tragic. And so he had to fight like a lot of adversity in his life, and he died fairly young. I think he was in his 50s when he passed away. He dealt with a lot of adversity and like sadness and stuff in his life. So it's like kind of really, I don't know, touching, powerful, something that this kind of poem would come out of that, really, because this is like I said, I believe this was a poem that Nelson Mandela would like recite to others and himself when he was like wrongfully imprisoned. So it's like it's inspired and kept up the fortitude, mental fortitude, I guess, of others. And it's just a really powerful poem. Like this poem, sometimes there are poems that are kind of quietly comforting, reassuring, and things like that. Invictus, I feel like, much like another one of my favorite poems, which I will talk about, I don't know when I'll talk about it, but we'll talk about that later. But that one, and also this poem, I kind of feel like they're not that kind of quiet reassurance, that quiet comforting, empowering. They're like a shout in the dark, I feel like, is what this poem more is. It's a defiant kind of yell. That is it's the type of poem that's like, it's not just like very chill. It's like, no matter what, I am alive. Like that kind of very forceful, yeah, like a shout a defiant shout in the darkness is, I guess, kind of what I mean. If that makes any sense at all, I probably sound like a complete weirdo, but that, like I said, I really loved this poem when I was a teenager. I thought it was absolutely badass. I had, and still to some degree, but especially as a teenager, had a big major problem with authority. So anything that sounded the bit like defiance in any way, or polite way of saying fuck you fate or anything like that, I was really into that at the time, and just kind of thought that was really cool. Now, as an adult, as I was looking through my poetry collection and trying to sift through for my favorites for this little series of videos, I feel like I still have that feeling of like that badassery, especially having looked up a little more about the poet himself and basically where he was at the time when he penned this. Also, just personally having gone through a really rough year. Like in the series of rough years that I have had over the course of my life, this is up there. I guess maybe I feel extra strongly about this poem now. Like I feel extra like connected with it, although I can tell you, in the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. That is not me. I am a big giant baby. There's lots of wincing crying aloud, bowed heads, things like that. And I am afraid all of the damn time because anxiety and everything. At the same time, I bounce back up. I don't know about an unconquerable soul, but for as long as I can remember, I have felt very connected with the mythological phoenix who always manages to rise from their ashes. That has always been a symbol that I have, I don't know, felt very connected with, I guess. And I think that kind of goes along with this poem in a sense. I am a little bit more bothered by circumstances and chance than this particular poet was at the time that he was penning that. And I've dealt with, I guess, less terrible circumstances than him, but I can feel that, like, connection with the words, with the idea, the message overall, that, you know what, no matter what, no matter the circumstance or the chance or whatever the repercussions of anything, I am the master of my fate, and I am the captain of my soul. We're all making our own choices, and we're all forging forward, I guess, if that makes any sense. It also kind of goes along with one of my favorite songs from, like, Hamilton, which is called Wait For It, and even though I do not like Aaron Burr, I do like his song. And there is one point in it, which is, they're my favorite lines from it, and it says, "I am the one thing in life I can control. I am inimitable, I am an original." And I don't know, I don't know if it's directly connected with that, but in my head, when I'm thinking about it, I feel like those two messages are very similar, maybe? I don't know, maybe I read too much into things. Extra fun facts, I guess, about William Ernest Henley. The thought is that he may have been an inspiration for Robert Louis Stevenson to write Long John Silver. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not, but that's a little bit of what I was reading in a couple of different places, that he may have been the inspiration for that. Also, the Henleys knew J.M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan, and apparently Henley's daughter, who passed away so young, Barrie was friends with her, and she is the inspiration for Wendy Darling, I believe. So, alright, now that you know all of this little tidbits about the poem, and me kind of going through this analysis, I guess, of it, I think I explained it in my first video, but I kind of was taking from a couple of podcasts that I like listening to that deal with poetry, both Poetry Unbound and Interesting People Reading Poetry. What they do is they read the poem first, and you can absorb it, and then tell a little bit about the background of the poem. I like going through it and everything, and then they read the poem again afterwards. So you can really then think about the poem again after having like this background information or analyzation or whatever. So yeah, I will read the poem again. Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.